future leader goes jousting with a classic on this 25th episode of Good Intentions. The name Satoru Iwata has come up a few times throughout the course of Good Intentions. Although he wouldn't rise to true prominence until the 21st century as the man selected to replace longtime Nintendo boss Hiroshi Yamauchi at the corporate helm, a big part of his ascendancy had to do with his long and valuable association with the company. In the 80s, Iwata worked for HAL Laboratories, of course, producing slightly amateurish software for imported American computers that, as luck would have it, ran on the same CMOS processor family that Nintendo would use in the Famicom and NES and Super NES. That was a rare specialty in Japan in the early 80s, and when Iwata petitioned Nintendo to become a developer for its new console, they were quick to put him to use as a contract assistant to help their fledgling internal game development teams as needed. Iwata worked on a few games including Pinball, the Japan-only F1 race, and the futuristic shooter Mach Rider. All of these games featured better-than-average tech and animation among their black box peers, with a slick sophistication matched only by magnum opus Super Mario Bros. Balloon Fight, however, stands as Iwata's landmark contribution to Nintendo's early video game legacy. It's a bit of an unassuming arcade-style game, one that comes off as unusually derivative for a Nintendo first-party creation. But even if it's arguably the least imaginative game in the early NES lineup, it's also one of the best. And more importantly, it has several meaningful connections that cement it as one of the most significant games in the Black Box series, including, it should be noted, a critical link to Super Mario Bros. Itself. So let's address the big elephant in the room, or perhaps the ostrich. Balloon Fight is a brazen clone of Williams' Joust, a 1982 action game designed by John Newcomer. It's not even subtle about it. Balloon Fight consists of one or two players flapping about a single screen, dotted by a shifting array of platforms, attempting to do battle with a host of enemies by attacking them from above. Everything here resembles a cutesy facelift for Joust. From the flight mechanics to the two-step combat process, to the danger lurking submerged in the pool at the bottom of the screen, all the way to the bonus stage, which is pretty much a balloon-based version of Joust's Egg Waves. Change the ostriches and buzzards of Joust to colorful balloons, and you have Balloon Fight. Here, as there, you defeat enemies by hitting them from above. In Joust, the idea is that you've struck your opponent with your jousting lance. Here, it's less anachronistic and more whimsical. You're using balloons. Pop a foe's balloon, and they plummet to the ground below. In Joust, a dismounted foe becomes an egg which its buzzard will eventually return to hatch into a new opponent. Here, a grounded bad guy stands stunned momentarily before inflating a new balloon for itself. Functionally, though, it's identical in gameplay terms. So, 2 is the two-player mechanic that allows two people to take on the bad guys together. Though, as in Joust, there is a bit of friendly fire, so you have to avoid popping your pal's balloon as you do battle. Also taken directly from Joust is the presence of a pool of liquid at the bottom of the single-screen arena. Here, it's water rather than lava, and it's occupied by a giant fish rather than a lava troll. But either way, taking a dive into the pool below is instantly fatal. Lying low over its surface is terribly unwise as well. You leave yourself open to being plucked from the air by the fish, which doesn't even offer the same slim chance of breaking free at the last second the way Joust's lava troll does. You also have to contend with a deadly random hazard that careens around the screen. In Joust, it's the deadly pterodactyl, which cruises through the arena seeking to take out players. Here, it's a spark of lightning that periodically zaps forth from the clouds in the background. The spark bounds erratically through the arena, and unlike the pterodactyl, you can't destroy it with a perfect head-on attack. You simply have to avoid it to the best of your ability, or it's an instant kill, even if you have two balloons. And most of all, Balloon Fight uses the same tap-to-fly mechanic as Joust. In the older game, tapping the flight button caused your winged mount to pump its pinions. Here, your little balloonist cups his hands and propels himself into the sky with rapid hand motions. It works out the same either way, though. The more quickly you tap the button, the higher and faster you'll rise into the air. By slowing your button presses, you'll glide steadily at a given altitude. And if you stop pressing the flight button altogether, you'll begin to sink and eventually plummet like a rock. It's strange for a Nintendo-developed game to look so blatantly similar to someone else's creation. The Black Box series was all over the map in terms of quality, but you certainly couldn't accuse the NES launch lineup of being tired rehashes of other arcade creations. Balloon Fight stands apart from the rest by virtue of being unashamedly derived from another company's hit. This, then, is where Satoru Iwata comes into the picture. After all, Iwata had already developed an NES version of Joust, so quite naturally Nintendo tapped him to work on this clone. Before the NES was the NES, Nintendo attempted to sell Atari on the idea of licensing and distributing the console in the West. Atari already had a nationwide distribution chain in place, as well as the facilities to manufacture and warehouse systems and games in America. The Famicom could have made for a perfectly timed replacement for the aging 2600 and the failed 5200. In order to pitch the idea to Atari, Nintendo asked HAL to develop Famicom ports of 4 popular US-developed games that it could show off on spec as proof of the hardware's capabilities. This deal ultimately failed to materialize, of course, and Nintendo went its own way. But 3 of those 4 games eventually did make their way to the NES, self-published by HAL in 1988. Millipede, Defender 2, and yes, Joust. As HAL's star CMOS 6502 programmer, of course, Iwata had a hand in converting these games. So naturally, Iwata was Nintendo's natural pick to work on its Joust clone. He would be the programmer for the home version of the game. Balloon Fight was a Nintendo R&D1 project, and it was headed up by designer Yoshio Sakamoto. While Iwata handled the home version of Balloon Fight, the arcade conversions programmer was Toshihiko Nakago. Nakago found himself vexed that his version didn't run anywhere near as smooth as Iwata's despite being on superior hardware. Iwata, it turned out, had been using a more advanced programming technique to define the game physics. As he explained in an Iwata Asks Q&A conversation with Nakago, he used decimal-based control physics rather than Nakago's less precise integer-based definitions, allowing for finer and more subtle movements by the combatants. Not only did Iwata's programming wizardry make Balloon Fight a better game, it also enhanced Super Mario Bros. Nakago would go on to do the programming work on that masterpiece, and he used Iwata's physics trick as the basis for Mario's underwater mechanics, resulting in that game's smooth, fluid swimming sections. If the Iwata connection were all Balloon Fight had going for it, the game would stand as a critical moment in video game history. But as it happens, Balloon Fight is also quite a lot of fun. It's a fast, fluid action game that requires skill and precision, and it's even better when played with a friend. Its 2-player mode lacks the competitive element of Mario Bros., except in the bonus screen, but it's speedy and dynamic, which more than makes up for any failings. On top of that, Balloon Fight contains an all-new bonus mode called Balloon Trip. Taking the flight mechanics of the standard game but dropping the competitive elements, Balloon Trip offers precisely what the name suggests: a chance for a single player to go on a seemingly endless journey through the sky. It's a test of precision, endurance, and boldness. Players have to steer their balloonist carefully through a maze of sparks, eventually moving in erratic motions. It's a simple enough concept, but the task is made trickier due to the imprecision and bobbling motion of the game's flight controls. Notably, Balloon Trip sets its action to one of the greatest tunes ever to appear on the NES. Hip Tanaka's Untitled Melody, which is even catchier than the game. Its classic status was fully canonized when Iwata passed away of cancer in 2015, and Tanaka released a remix of the tune as tribute to one of the most talented and humane leaders gaming's ever seen. There is a tendency these days, I think, for some people to take Balloon Fight for granted. But amidst its black box brethren, it stands out as one of the most refined and entertaining classic NES creations even now. And thanks to its slick controls and addictive Balloon Trip mode and music, it arguably surpasses the game that very clearly inspired it. It's a simple but endlessly replayable NES masterpiece and a meaningful moment in video game history. Next time on Good Intentions, sleuthing out the story behind NES's very first US exclusive creation.